For democracy, there is very little that you ought to be doing that should be secret, if anything, honestly.
It has been a difficult 3 years for the small northern nation of Iceland. In fact, as the country's president put it recently, if you were to try to create the perfect laboratory experiment to test the resilience of a nation, you could hardly do better than what Iceland has experienced. The country was the first to be hit by the global financial upheaval. The failure of its banks led to a complete economic collapse. 1 year later, a volcano with an almost unpronounceable name erupted, covering the country in ash. Then, 6 months later, came a second massive eruption. As President Olafur Grimsson put it, it was a sobering experience.
CLS Group, and these are all non-taxed profits that are coming through here, or turnover. CLS Group, 2013, 1,250 trillion was what their annual turnover was. The New York Stock Exchange and LIFE, London International Financial Futures Exchange, 474 trillion. Now that comes to a total of 1,845 trillion. A 1% tax on that would have more than eliminated all the UK debt and would have had more money than that's going to be called the Easter Rising, because Weir Bank, as of the 13th of April, is open for business to all members of Re-Movement, and it will be issuing various financial instruments to you to help you pay off your public liability debt. The book, which I'll just show you there, these books, these checkbooks, will be available from April the 13th, and as I said before, will give you the ability to pay off all public liability debts, and in some instances your private debts. Now, one or two things I want to just cover here are the actual intricacies of how you become a checkbook holder or a member of Weir Bank. The first thing you'll have to do is to go and visit the Weir Bank website, where the Greek government is planning maybe to bring in a parallel currency and default on its loans to the European Central Bank.
That we defined the challenge not just as an economic challenge, but also as a profound political and social and democratic challenge. So we instigated various measures to deal with this political challenge. We established a commission to examine the failure of the banks, the corporations, and political institutions in our country. We appointed a special prosecutor's office, which became the largest judicial entity in our country. We even set in motion examination of our constitution, as well as various other legislative reforms that were enacted following the financial collapse. So the first dimension is to treat this as a profound challenge to society and the political system. The second dimension is that in various financial and economic measures, we went, as you mentioned, against the prevailing orthodoxies. We, for example, did not pump public money into the banks. These were private banks, so we allowed them to fail. Those who had lent money to these banks had to take the responsibilities of having operated in the free market. We let our currency, the krona, be devaluated strongly. We instigated budgetary measures that tried to shield those who are the poorest or faced biggest difficulties because of their social status. And we enacted many other measures that were contrary to the traditional recommendations by experts or international institutions. And it was very interesting that at a recent Farewell conference that was held in Reykjavik, because the IMF program is over. IMF has now left Iceland because of the success of our recovery. The IMF leadership, which participated in this conference, acknowledged that dealing with Iceland had been a very interesting and fundamental learning process for the IMF.
But, Mr. President, the IMF at the time warned Iceland that you would never again be able to borrow if you didn't bail out the banks. And politicians in Europe said the same thing. The rating agencies demanded that the government honor the debts of the banks.
Well, all of this is true. With respect to the rating agencies, I have to tell you that I still think they have a lot to answer for, because when we look back at why we didn't take measures in 2006 and 2007 or early 2008, when some experts were warning us about the banking system, the rating agencies, all of them, Moody's, Standard & Poor and Fitch, all gave the Icelandic banks a clean bill of health, even an excellent certificate. So the fundamental question with respect to the rating agencies, that if they were so wrong in the years leading up to the banking crisis, why are they suddenly right now?
Iceland's government released the long-awaited report on monetary reform by my friend parliamentarian Frosti Sigurðsson, entitled A Better Monetary System for Iceland. Lord Turner, a member of the UK's Financial Policy Committee, nails the basic problem in the second paragraph. The fundamental issue is the ability of banks to create credit money and purchasing power, and the instability which
Not one bankster in the U.S. has ever been charged with a crime relating to the financial collapse of '08 when it became publicly known. There's still virtually no regulation of the banks, and they are pulling a near record $160 billion in annual profits, all from, remember, money created out of thin air.
What I call the third dimension of the Icelandic response, that in this very difficult dispute with Britain and the Netherlands, where they demanded that the people of Iceland should be formally responsible for the debt of a private Icelandic bank that operated in Britain and the Netherlands, I decided, following a strong national demand, to put that to a referendum, to let the democratic will of the people be superior to the financial interest of the market. And when I took that decision in the beginning of 2010, it went against not only the majority in my own parliament and what the government had decided, but every government in Europe was telling me that that was wrong. That the financial markets should be supreme in confrontation with the democratic will of the people. But I decided to go the other way. There were a lot of people who predicted that that would be the downfall of Iceland. We would be isolated in the world. We will become the Cuba of the North. But the fact of the matter is, the people of Iceland twice were able to exercise their democratic will, and now Iceland is coming out of this crisis and establishing recovery earlier and more effectively than other European countries.
There are two elements about that. First of all, there was a bill passed. You refused to sign it, didn't you? And you decided to go to the people in a referendum.
Yes.
Even though Brown in the UK threatened to freeze Iceland's assets in that country. He's not a very popular man, I take it, if he ever shows up in Reykjavik. An understatement. So it is no small achievement that 3 years after it all began, Iceland appears to be emerging from the worst of the crisis. Unemployment is down to levels that many other European nations would envy. Investment is returning, and the economy is projected to grow by as much as 3% this year. What makes this all the more remarkable is the way Iceland has done it. Instead of following the standard formula of severe austerity and debt repayment, Iceland did pretty much the opposite. Olafur Grimsson is the president of Iceland. This morning he's in a studio in Reykjavik. Mr. President, good morning.
Good morning.
Pleasure to have you on our program. You have said that the collapse, the financial collapse in your country threatened your entire democratic and social system. How so?
It was an extraordinary experience to witness how the collapse of the banks, the financial crisis, seemed to be in the process of breaking up the very strong social cohesion which has characterized Iceland for centuries. In our country, this led to continuous protests in the streets, even at the height of winter, riots in front of the parliament and the prime minister's office. And from one day to another, as we came into January of 2009, what I feared every morning when I woke up was not that we wouldn't be able to deal with the economic consequences, but whether what was happening to our political and social and democratic system would completely split apart and we wouldn't be able to put it together again.
How far away from the collapse of that social cohesion you talk about do you think the country actually was?
Well, it's very difficult to say. We had the moment in the middle of the night in January where there was a big crowd outside the Prime Minister's office demonstrating, and the police was guarding the Prime Minister's office with shields and hamlets, and the crowd started throwing rocks at the police officers and the policemen. And then it seemed that perhaps the Prime Minister's office would be invaded. But then all of a sudden, a small group came out of the crowd of demonstrators and put themselves in front of the police force. So the stones that were being thrown would hit fellow protesters. And many of us believe that if these individuals, 15, 20 of them or so, had not at that moment decided that enough was enough, nobody could have predicted what would have happened during that night.
And nothing like this has ever happened in Iceland before?
No, never, ever. So, as I have said to many, both financial leaders and political leaders in other countries, what all of this demonstrated is that banks, financial institutions, those who operate in the financial markets, both nationally and globally, they carry an enormous political and democratic and social responsibility, because their actions on their own can break down our democratic and political system.
Frosty then lays out the basic solution. In a sovereign money system, only the central bank, owned by the state, may create money as coin, notes, or electronic money. Commercial banks would be prevented from creating money. Frosty does allow for complementary currencies such as Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies, but does warn that since the issuer is rewarded with the seigniorage, the profit from making money, they could lead to inflation and asset bubbles. Sovereign money involves controlling only the type of money that is by law acceptable as payment in commerce and for the settlement of debts and taxes. Frosty stresses that his proposal is not the nationalization of the banking system, as advocated by many socialist monetary reformers such as Ellen Brown. Although commercial banks will no longer create money, they will continue to administer payment services for customers and will make loans by acting as intermediaries between savers and borrowers. Under sovereign money, however, the government is not allowed to create money directly. The decision to create money would be made by a money creation committee, independent of government, on the basis of what is appropriate for the economy as a whole. The committee will not have the power to decide who benefits from its money creation or what new money will be used for. The allocation of new money will be decided democratically by Parliament.
We can directly compare is the response of the message that the Icelandic people have sent to their banksters versus the message that the American people and many other people in many other countries have sent to their banksters. In Iceland, the message is, if you do this kind of stuff, you are going to be personally held responsible and thrown in jail. And whereas in the American banking system, you do this kind of stuff, we're going to parachute money down from heaven on you and make sure that you get everything you need and you're never going to go to jail. I think I know which one fosters a greater sense of rule of law.
Why would you want to help him, give him asylum in Iceland?
Well, I think that the information that he has provided into the public domain is very important for every individual that uses the internet or uses phones. I just want you to be aware of that there is a very serious attack on freedom of information, on freedom of speech and expression. So just remember, it is always darkest before dawn.